everything. My sister kicked me out of her wedding and humiliated me, saying I was forbidden from appearing in the photos because I had no class, until I decided to get revenge. I should probably start by telling you who I am, because what happened to me might happen to anyone who's ever been the responsible one in their family. My name is Nancy, I'm 32, and I've spent the last decade building what most people would call a comfortable life. While my friends were blowing their paychecks on designer bags and weekend getaways, I was quietly investing in real estate, turning my modest marketing salary into something that actually mattered. I own 3 rental properties now, 2 small apartments downtown and a beautiful lakeside house that I list on vacation rental apps. It's not flashy money, but it's steady, growing money. The kind that lets me sleep well at night knowing I'm building something real for my future. Each month, the rental income from these properties covers their mortgages, plus a healthy profit that I reinvest into expanding my portfolio. But none of that seemed to matter as I sat across from my sister at Romano's Bistro last Thursday afternoon, watching her twirl her engagement ring like it was some kind of scepter. The restaurant buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, business people grabbing quick meals, mothers with strollers meeting friends, the familiar soundtrack of clinking silverware and casual conversation. But our corner table felt isolated, heavy with the familiar tension that always seemed to follow Cassidy wherever she went. "So, Nancy," she said, not even bothering to look up from her phone as she scrolled through what I assumed were wedding Pinterest boards. Her manicured fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, pausing occasionally to save images that probably cost more to recreate than most people's monthly salaries. "I suppose you're wondering why I wanted to meet." I stirred my soup methodically, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to end well. It never did with Cassidy. There was always an agenda, always a request disguised as family bonding, always a way for her to position herself as the successful sister, while making me feel like the cautious, boring one. "The engagement ring was kind of a hint," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Congratulations, by the way." She finally looked at me then, and I caught that familiar flash of something. Superiority, maybe. That had been there since we were kids. Her eyes sparkled with the same self-satisfaction I'd seen when she'd gotten the lead in the school play, when she'd been crowned homecoming queen, when she'd landed Derek Morrison despite having maxed out her credit cards to afford the wardrobe she'd needed to fit into his social circle. "Thank you." Derek proposed last weekend at the Grandview Resort. 2-carat oval cut, platinum setting. We had champagne that cost more per bottle than you probably spend on groceries in a month. She held up her hand, angling it so the diamond caught the restaurant's overhead lighting just right. The ring was beautiful, I had to admit, but I also found myself automatically calculating what it must have cost. Probably $15,000, maybe $20,000. There it was. The dig. Always had to be a dig with Cassidy. She couldn't just share good news. She had to find a way to make it a commentary on my lifestyle choices, my priorities, my apparent inability to understand that life was meant to be lived in the moment rather than carefully planned and budgeted. "We're planning the wedding for next spring, April 28th at the Riverside Country Club. I've already booked the photographer Derek's family uses for all their events. You know, the one who did that senator's daughter's wedding that was featured in Metropolitan Living magazine." Her voice carried that breathless excitement that always accompanied her most expensive decisions. "That sounds lovely," I said, though I was already calculating in my head what a wedding at Riverside would cost. The venue rental alone was probably $20,000, and that was before you added catering, flowers, photography, music, and all the other details that would transform a simple ceremony into the kind of production that ended up in society magazines. Cassidy leaned back in her chair, finally putting her phone down to give me her full attention. "It will be. We're sparing no expense. Derek's family has certain expectations about these things. They move in circles where presentation matters, where every detail reflects on the family name and their position in the community." The way she emphasized family name made my stomach tighten. I'd heard variations of this speech before, usually from our parents, about how Cassidy was the one who understood what success looked like, while I was stuck in my penny-pinching mindset that would never get me anywhere in life. "I'm sure it'll be beautiful," I said carefully, sensing that we were building toward whatever request had prompted this lunch invitation. "It will be perfect," she corrected, her tone taking on that steely determination that meant she'd already made decisions that would somehow involve me. "Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you today." Cassidy reached into her oversized designer purse, the kind that cost more than most people's rent, and pulled out a thick folder, the sort you'd use for important legal documents or detailed business proposals. She placed it on the table between us like she was presenting evidence in court, her movements deliberate and practiced. The wedding party has already been selected, she began, opening the folder to reveal what looked like meticulously organized charts, lists, and photographs. Derek's sister Amelia is maid of honor, and I've chosen 3 of my sorority sisters as bridesmaids. They're all from the right families, you understand. People Derek's parents already know and approve of. She flipped through several pages, showing me professionally printed photos of each bridesmaid, along with detailed notes about their responsibilities. I nodded, though I noticed she hadn't actually invited me to be in the wedding party. Not that I'd expected to be. Cassidy and I had never been close, even as children. She'd always gravitated toward friends who could enhance her social standing, while I'd been content with a smaller circle of genuine relationships that didn't require constant performance or financial investment. Of course, family is still important, she continued, her tone taking on that fake, sweet quality that meant trouble was definitely coming. So naturally, you'll be attending as my sister. We've reserved a seat for you at table 7 with some of Dad's cousins and their families. The way she said it made it clear that table 7 was not where the important guests would be sitting. Naturally, I echoed, wondering where this was heading but already dreading the answer. However, and there was the word I'd been waiting for, the verbal equivalent of a trap door opening beneath my feet. Derek's family is very traditional about these things, very concerned with aesthetics and the overall impression the wedding will make. These photos will likely end up in society pages, possibly even picked up by bridal magazines as a featured wedding. Every single detail has to be absolutely perfect. She pulled out a piece of heavy cardstock paper with what looked like a professionally designed dress code printed in elegant script. The header read, "Wedding Guest Guidelines," in flowing calligraphy, and below it was a list of requirements that grew more specific and expensive with each line. "I've had the wedding planner put together some guidelines for family members," she explained, sliding the paper across to me. "Nothing too restrictive, just to ensure everyone fits the overall vision we've created for the day." I scanned the page, my eyebrows rising with each detailed requirement. Dress colors were limited to a specific palette of muted jewel tones that complement the spring garden aesthetic. Shoes had to be a certain heel height, no less than 2 inches, no more than 3.5. Even jewelry was specified down to the metal type. Understated elegance in gold or silver only. No costume pieces or statement jewelry that might distract from the bridal party. Hair and makeup guidelines took up an entire paragraph, suggesting professional styling recommended to achieve the sophisticated look appropriate for this venue. At the bottom of the page, in what I was absolutely certain was Cassidy's own handwriting, was an additional note that made my blood run cold. Family photos will be limited to immediate family only during formal portrait session. Extended family and friends will be included in casual reception photos. "Cassidy," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even, "some of these requirements are pretty specific and expensive. You're basically asking people to spend hundreds of dollars just to attend your wedding." She waved a dismissive hand, her engagement ring catching the light again. "Oh, I know you're not used to investing in your appearance for special occasions, but this is important." Derek's mother specifically mentioned how crucial it is that everyone look appropriate for the venue and the level of photography we're having done. The word appropriate hit me like a physical slap, as if my usual style, which I'd always thought was perfectly presentable, was somehow embarrassing or inadequate for her elevated social circle. "And about the photos," she continued, her eyes not quite meeting mine as she flipped to another page in her folder. "The photographer charges premium rates for extended sessions, and we want to make sure we get all the essential shots first. You know, the bride with her wedding party, the formal family portraits with just parents and siblings, the couple with Derek's business associates and family friends. We'll have plenty of casual shots throughout the reception where everyone can be included." I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest as the implication became clear. "So I'm not in the formal family photos?" "Well, you'll be in some of them, of course. The big group shots at the very end, probably, once we've gotten all the important portraits finished. But the main family portraits need to be cohesive and polished. Derek's family is very particular about their image, and these photos will be displayed at important events for years to come." The folder remained open between us, and I could see more papers tucked inside, what looked like vendor contracts with eye-watering dollar amounts, detailed timelines, and expense lists that probably totaled more than I'd spent on my first car. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a carefully orchestrated production designed to cement Cassidy's place in a social hierarchy she'd been climbing toward her entire adult life. And apparently, I was being cast as little more than an extra in her perfect day. The security guard's hand was firm on my arm as he escorted me through the country club's marble foyer, past clusters of elegantly dressed guests who turned to stare with barely concealed curiosity. Their whispers followed us like a wake, and I caught fragments of speculation about what the bride's sister could have possibly done to warrant such a dramatic and public exit from what had been, until that moment, a flawlessly executed society wedding. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to collect your belongings from the coat check and leave the premises immediately," the guard said quietly, his tone professional but not unkind. He seemed uncomfortable with the situation, probably unused to escorting family members out of wedding receptions. "Mrs. Morrison has requested that you not return for the remainder of the event." Mrs. Morrison. Cassidy had been married for exactly 47 minutes, and she was already wielding her new name like a weapon, using it to establish her authority and her right to decide who belonged in her perfect new life. I handed over my coat check ticket with trembling fingers, my mind still reeling from what had just happened inside the reception hall. The beautiful ballroom with its soaring crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course's pristine fairways. The tables draped in ivory silk linens and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The photographer with his expensive equipment and assistants, capturing every perfect moment of Cassidy's perfect day for posterity and, apparently, for Derek's family's social media presence. Until Uncle Robert had ruined everything by asking me to join a simple family photo. "Come on, Nancy," he'd said with his usual jovial grin, his face flushed with champagne and wedding joy, as he gestured me over to where the immediate family had gathered near the head table. "Can't have a family picture without the bride's sister. Family's family, right?" I'd hesitated for a long moment, remembering Cassidy's explicit instructions from our lunch 2 months earlier about formal portraits being limited to essential family only. But this was Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother who'd driven 6 hours from Pennsylvania to be here, who'd always treated Cassidy and me with exactly the same affection and interest. How could I explain to this kind, well-meaning man that I'd been specifically excluded from the important photos, relegated to the casual shots that would never see a frame or an album? So I'd stepped forward, smoothing down the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically to meet Cassidy's exacting requirements. $280 at Nordstrom, plus another $150 for the shoes that were already making my feet ache after just 3 hours. The most expensive outfit I'd ever purchased, chosen carefully to make sure I looked appropriate for her perfect day, sophisticated enough to blend seamlessly into the country club's rarefied atmosphere. The photographer had been in the middle of arranging everyone according to height and relationship dynamics when Cassidy noticed me in the frame. I watched her face change in real time, saw the moment when her practiced bridal smile faltered, and something much colder took its place. "What are you doing?" Her voice cut through the pre-photo chatter like a blade, sharp enough to slice through the gentle murmur of family conversation and the soft, classical music that had been playing in the background. Every conversation stopped immediately. Every head turned toward us. "Uncle Robert asked me to—" I'd started, my voice already apologetic, already shrinking under the weight of her disapproval and the sudden attention of 75 wedding guests. "No." The word was sharp, final, delivered with a cold fury that made my chest tighten and my face burn with embarrassment. "I specifically told you these were for immediate family only. You're ruining the composition, and we don't have time to reshoot everything." The photographer lowered his expensive camera, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension crackling through what had been a joyful family moment. Derek's parents exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of the bride's family dynamics. Mom and Dad stood frozen in their formal poses, neither stepping in to defend their daughter nor supporting Cassidy's public dismissal of their own flesh and blood. "Cassidy, she is immediate family," Uncle Robert had said gently, his confusion evident as he tried to understand why his niece was being excluded from what should have been a treasured family memory. "She's your sister. She knows the arrangement," Cassidy snapped, her perfect makeup not quite hiding the flush of anger that was creeping up her neck and into her carefully contoured cheeks. "These photos are going to be displayed at Derek's parents' anniversary party next month and probably framed in their home for years. They need to be absolutely flawless." That word, flawless, echoed in my mind now as I sat in my car in the country club's parking lot, still shaking from the humiliation of being escorted out like some kind of wedding crasher rather than the bride's own sister. To understand what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand who my sister and I really are underneath the surface. We're only 3 years apart in age, but we might as well have been raised in different families, with completely different value systems and life philosophies that shaped every decision we made. Cassidy has always been the golden child, the one who understood instinctively that life was about appearances, about projecting success whether or not you'd actually earned it through hard work and sacrifice. Even back in high school, she'd max out the credit card our parents had given her for emergencies to buy the right jeans, the right makeup, the right accessories, anything that would cement her place in the popular crowd and maintain the image she'd carefully cultivated. She'd come home with shopping bags full of things she couldn't actually afford, designer labels that meant more to her than the debt she was accumulating, and when Mom would start to lecture her about financial responsibility, Cassidy would just flash that 1,000-watt smile and say, "You have to spend money to make money, Mom. This is an investment in my future, in building the right connections and the right image." And somehow, incredibly, it actually worked for her. She managed to catch Derek Morrison's attention at a charity fundraiser she'd had no business attending, given her entry-level marketing salary and mountain of credit card debt. But she looked the part in her borrowed designer dress and professionally done hair. And Derek, whose family owns 3 luxury car dealerships and holds a country club membership that goes back 4 generations, was immediately smitten with her polished appearance and social confidence. She got a job at Preston and Associates marketing firm downtown not because of her qualifications or experience, but because Derek's father happened to play golf twice a week with the company's founding partner. Everything in her life was connected, networked, built on relationships and the right appearances rather than actual merit or achievement. I went a completely different route, one that my family never quite understood or appreciated. While Cassidy was charging designer clothes and expensive dinners to build her image, I was working 2 jobs through college, waiting tables at night and tutoring math on weekends, determined to graduate completely debt-free rather than starting my adult life in financial chains. While she was networking at expensive happy hours that cost half a week's salary, I was spending my evenings researching investment opportunities, learning about real estate markets, studying successful entrepreneurs who'd built wealth through patience and smart decision-making rather than luck and connections. Where Cassidy saw an old downtown building and thought about whether it was located in a trendy enough neighborhood for her image, I saw potential rental income, equity growth opportunities, and cash flow that could fund my next investment. I learned to look past surface appearances to underlying value, to think in terms of long-term financial health rather than short-term social positioning. My lakeside house, the one I'd eventually offer her for her honeymoon, represents everything I believe in and work toward. It took me 4 years to save for the down payment. 4 years of bringing lunch to work instead of buying expensive salads, driving my paid-off Honda Civic instead of upgrading to something flashier, choosing generic brands at the grocery store and clipping coupons like my grandmother had taught me. But when I finally signed those papers and received the keys, I knew I owned something real and tangible, something that would generate income whether I had a job or not, something that represented genuine security rather than the illusion of success. Every month, vacation renters pay enough to cover the mortgage plus extra income that I immediately reinvest into expanding my portfolio. That house represents delayed gratification, building wealth slowly and sustainably, creating real security through smart choices rather than lucky connections or borrowed money. It's not the biggest or fanciest house on the lake, but it's completely mine, generating passive income that grows my net worth every single month. Cassidy finds this approach completely incomprehensible and, frankly, embarrassing. To her, my cheap lifestyle is a reflection of small thinking and missed opportunities, evidence that I don't understand how the world really works for successful people. "You live like a poor person, Nancy," she'd said just last Christmas when I'd given everyone thoughtful but modestly priced gifts while she'd presented elaborate packages that had clearly cost more than she earned in 2 weeks. "You make decent money now, but you act like you're still in college eating ramen noodles and shopping at thrift stores." But what she'd never grasped was that I wasn't living like I was poor. I was living like I was building something meaningful and permanent, something that would provide real security and freedom rather than the fragile house of cards that required constant maintenance and ever-increasing debt to sustain. The war between Cassidy and me had been going on for so long that our parents had stopped trying to mediate or understand both sides, and had instead chosen to firmly support the daughter whose lifestyle they found more exciting and aspirational. Unfortunately for me, they'd chosen Cassidy without any apparent consideration of the long-term consequences of their favoritism. It started when I was in college and began questioning the financial decisions I'd watched them make my entire childhood, decisions that kept them trapped in cycles of debt and financial stress despite earning decent middle-class incomes. Dad worked in insurance sales, Mom was a dental hygienist, solid, respectable jobs that should have provided a comfortable life for our family. But they'd always lived paycheck to paycheck, carrying credit card balances that never seemed to decrease, taking out car loans for vehicles they couldn't afford, never quite getting ahead financially because they prioritized looking successful over actually building wealth. When I suggested they consider refinancing their mortgage to take advantage of lower interest rates, Mom accused me of thinking they were too stupid to manage their own money and told me it was presumptuous for a college student to give financial advice to adults. When I offered to help them set up investment accounts instead of keeping their savings in low-yield accounts that weren't even keeping up with inflation, Dad told me I was getting too big for my britches and needed to focus on my own finances before worrying about theirs. But when Cassidy graduated and moved back home for 6 months to figure things out, which really meant partying every weekend and shopping during the week while contributing absolutely nothing to household expenses, they called it finding herself and praised her for taking time to explore her options. When she racked up $8,000 in credit card debt furnishing her first apartment with furniture and decorations she couldn't afford, they helped her pay it off, just this once, by dipping into their retirement savings. The double standard was exhausting and increasingly obvious as we got older. My careful budgeting and financial planning was dismissed as obsessive and no way to live your life. Cassidy's financial irresponsibility was characterized as living her life to the fullest and understanding that you can't take money with you. My investments and real estate purchases were described as risky gambling that would probably lose money. Her designer purchases and expensive lifestyle choices were praised as investments in her professional image that would pay dividends in her career. The tension reached its peak during family dinners, which became carefully choreographed exercises in subtle warfare and comparison. Cassidy would arrive wearing some new outfit, usually something that cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months, and immediately launch into animated stories about expensive restaurants she'd tried with Derek, weekend trips to wine country, or exclusive events they'd attended through his family's connections. Mom and Dad would listen with rapt attention, asking admiring questions about the thread count of her new sheets, the vintage of wine she'd discovered at some trendy downtown bar, or the designer of whatever handbag she was carrying that week. They hung on every detail of her glamorous lifestyle, living vicariously through her ability to spend money they'd never been able to spend themselves. Then they'd turn to me with polite but noticeably cooler interest, their enthusiasm visibly dampening as they performed their parental duty to include both daughters in the conversation. "How are your projects going, Nancy?" Mom would ask, the slight pause before projects making it clear she didn't quite understand or approve of what I did with my money. "My rental income was up 15% this quarter," I might answer. Or, "I'm looking at a duplex that could provide strong cash flow and help me diversify my portfolio." I'd try to share my excitement about a successful investment or a renovation project that had increased a property's value, hoping they might show some interest in my achievements. "That's nice, dear," Dad would say with the tone of someone humoring a child's hobby, but his attention would already be drifting back to Cassidy, who'd inevitably have another story about Derek's family's connections or some charity gala they'd attended where she'd met someone important. It was like watching my parents fall in love with a lifestyle they couldn't afford, experiencing it vicariously through Cassidy's reckless spending and social climbing. They'd never been able to live the way she did, but they could admire her for doing what they'd always wished they could do: throw caution to the wind, live for today, and worry about the consequences later. What they couldn't see, or chose not to see, was that behind Cassidy's glamorous facade was a growing mountain of debt, a complete inability to plan beyond the next social event, and a lifestyle that was fundamentally unsustainable without either dramatic income increases or continued family bailouts. The call came 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening when I was comfortably settled at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing rental applications for my downtown duplex and comparing credit scores and references from potential tenants. My phone buzzed with Cassidy's contact photo, a glamour shot she'd had taken at a professional studio last year that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "Nancy, thank God you answered," she said without any preamble, her voice carrying that breathless excitement that usually meant she'd had an idea that would somehow become my problem to solve. "I have the most amazing request, and you're literally the only person who can help me with this." I set down the rental applications and braced myself for whatever was coming, already knowing from her tone that this conversation was going to cost me something: time, money, or peace of mind. "What's going on, Cassidy? So you know Derek's family has that gorgeous house in the Hamptons, right? The one his grandmother left them with the wraparound porch and the direct beach access? Well, his parents usually lend it to newlyweds in the family for their honeymoons. It's like a family tradition that goes back decades. But here's the problem. His cousin Marcus got married last month, and they're using it through the entire summer season, all the way through Labor Day." I waited, knowing there had to be more to this story, and that somehow my properties were about to become part of whatever solution she'd devised. Derek is absolutely devastated about this, she continued, her voice taking on that dramatic quality she'd perfected in high school theater. He's been telling everyone at his investment firm that we'd be honeymooning at the family estate in the Hamptons. His colleagues, his boss, even some of the firm's biggest clients who were invited to the wedding. It's become this whole thing about maintaining the family's reputation and showing that Derek is worthy of eventually taking over more responsibility in his father's business. I pulled up my property management software on my laptop, already suspecting where this conversation was heading and feeling my stomach start to sink with the implications. But then I remembered, you have that absolutely gorgeous house on Lake Minnewaska, the one with the private dock and the hot tub and all those floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Nancy, it's practically as nice as the Hamptons house, maybe even better because it's so private and romantic and exclusive. Derek saw the photos on your rental listing, and he was completely blown away by how luxury it looks. My stomach started to sink further. Lake Minnewaska was my most profitable property, consistently booked solid through the entire summer season at $400 a night, sometimes higher during peak weeks. I'd been planning to use the summer rental revenue to put a substantial down payment on a small commercial property I'd been eyeing downtown, a building with retail space on the ground floor, and apartments above that would significantly diversify my portfolio. Nancy, are you still there? Please tell me you're considering this. I'm here, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral while I processed what she was actually asking of me. What exactly are you requesting? Well, obviously we'd need the house for a full week. Maybe even 10 days if Derek can extend his time off from work. His parents are expecting us to have a proper honeymoon that reflects well on the family name and Derek's position at the firm. Nothing cheap or rushed that would make it seem like we can't afford to do things properly. I scrolled through my booking calendar, looking at the solid wall of reservations that stretched from May through September. Cassidy, that house is booked every single weekend through Labor Day and most weekdays too. I'd have to cancel multiple existing reservations to make a week available, and some of these people booked months in advance. Oh, but this is family, she interrupted, as if that magical word explained everything and made all practical considerations irrelevant. Those other people can find somewhere else to stay. There are plenty of vacation rentals around the lake. This is my wedding we're talking about, Nancy, the most important week of my entire life, and Derek's reputation with his family is on the line. The week she'd need for her honeymoon would cost me $2,800 in lost rental income, plus the additional revenue I'd lose from disappointed guests, who might never book with me again after having their reservations canceled at the last minute. Not to mention the damage to my reputation as a reliable host, which was crucial in the competitive vacation rental market. Plus, Cassidy continued, her voice brightening as if she'd just thought of the perfect argument, it would actually be beneficial for you too when you think about it. You could use the professional photos that Derek and I take there for your rental listing. Imagine having gorgeous images of an actual couple enjoying the space, looking elegant and sophisticated in your house. That kind of marketing content would be worth thousands of dollars and would probably increase your booking rate significantly. The audacity of it took my breath away for a moment. She wanted me to give up nearly $3,000 in guaranteed income so she could have a free luxury honeymoon that would impress her new in-laws. And somehow she'd convinced herself that this would actually be doing me a favor. I should have said no immediately. Should have explained that my rental properties weren't family favors, but actual business investments that required careful management and generated the income I needed to expand my portfolio. Should have pointed out that she'd never offered to help me when I was saving for down payments, working weekend renovation projects, or dealing with difficult tenants at 2 a.m. Instead, I found myself saying, let me check what reservations I'd need to cancel and get back to you. The silence on the other end told me she'd expected much more resistance, had probably prepared arguments and guilt trips that she wouldn't need to deploy. Really? Oh, Nancy, you're absolutely amazing. Derek is going to be so relieved when I tell him. His mother specifically asked about our honeymoon plans at dinner last week, and when I mentioned that my sister owned a luxury lake house, she was so impressed. She said it sounded much more intimate and exclusive than some crowded resort where you'd have to deal with other tourists. I opened my booking calendar and started scrolling through the reservations, each one representing real people with real plans that I'd be disrupting for my sister's convenience. The Hendersons, who'd been coming to the lake house for their anniversary celebration for 3 years running and had specifically requested the same week because it held sentimental value for them. The Johnson family reunion, that had been planned for 8 months, with relatives flying in from 3 different states to spend time together at the lake. A couple from Chicago who'd booked the house to celebrate the husband's retirement after 30 years with the same company. A young family with 2 small children who'd saved up all year for their first real vacation together, choosing my house because the photos showed it was perfect for families with young kids. Nancy? Are you still there? You're not having second thoughts, are you? I'm here. I'm looking at what's actually booked that week. I paused at one reservation that made my chest tighten with guilt. The Patels had specifically requested that exact week because it was the only time their entire extended family could coordinate schedules for a multi-generational vacation. 3 generations coming together: grandparents, parents, and grandchildren, probably for the last time before the elderly grandparents became too frail to travel. They'd sent me the sweetest email when they booked, explaining how much this trip meant to their family and how grateful they were to find a house large enough and beautiful enough to accommodate everyone comfortably. The grandmother had apparently been talking about this lake vacation for months, showing pictures of my house to all her friends and neighbors. I'd have to cancel 6 different reservations, I said slowly, my voice tight with the implications of what she was asking me to do. But you can do that, right? I mean, it's your house, so you have the right to cancel bookings if something important comes up. Technically, yes. Most vacation rental platforms allowed hosts to cancel bookings, though it came with financial penalties and seriously damaged your reliability rating with both the platform and future guests. What Cassidy didn't understand, or chose not to consider, was that my success as a host depended entirely on trust and reputation. Guests needed to know that when they booked my properties, those reservations were solid, that they could plan family vacations, anniversary celebrations, and special occasions around dates I'd confirmed. The platform cancellation fees alone would cost me $400, I explained, hoping she might offer to cover at least those direct costs. Oh well, Derek and I could probably help with that, she said airily, though we both knew from years of experience that she'd never follow through on such an offer. She had a talent for making vague promises about money when she needed something, then conveniently forgetting about them once she'd gotten what she wanted. This is just so perfect, Nancy. The house will be absolutely gorgeous in late April, and Derek's already talking about having his parents up for a weekend later this summer to see the property. They're always looking for nice places to entertain their friends, and if they love your house as much as I know they will, you could probably book it for corporate retreats and executive weekends. Derek's father knows so many successful business people who would pay premium rates for that kind of exclusive access. More free nights. Of course. I could already see how this would play out. First, the free honeymoon, then the obligation to host Derek's parents at a family discount, then corporate events where I'd be expected to provide luxury accommodations at below-market rates because of the valuable connections they'd be bringing to my business. I'll need to make some phone calls, I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. Some of these guests have been planning their trips for months. I'll have to come up with explanations for why they're the morning of the wedding. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for 30 minutes, second-guessing every choice I'd made about my appearance. The navy blue dress looked appropriately elegant but not flashy, professional but not dowdy, expensive enough to meet Cassidy's requirements but not so ostentatious that I'd draw unwanted attention. The shoes were uncomfortable but added exactly the height specified in her detailed dress code. And I'd even splurged on professional makeup and hairstyling, wanting to make absolutely sure I looked polished enough for her society page photos. What I didn't realize was that no amount of preparation would be enough to earn acceptance in the world Cassidy was desperately trying to join. Riverside Country Club was everything I'd expected. All old money elegance and understated luxury that somehow managed to feel more expensive than places that were actively trying to look expensive. The kind of venue where the staff remembered your drink preferences from visits decades apart, where the silence itself seemed curated and intentional, where every detail from the crystal stemware to the hand-polished silver spoke of wealth so established it didn't need to announce itself. I arrived exactly when the invitation specified, not too early to seem eager or desperate for inclusion, not late enough to be noticed or cause any disruption to Cassidy's carefully orchestrated timeline. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit, though I couldn't help calculating costs as I watched. Cassidy looked absolutely radiant in her designer gown, probably $8,000 based on similar dresses I'd seen in bridal magazines. And Derek seemed genuinely happy as they exchanged vows that had almost certainly been professionally written by the wedding planner. Everything was perfect, down to the rose petals scattered along the ivory runner and the string quartet playing softly in the background. The flowers alone probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the photographer moved through the ceremony like a shadow, capturing every moment with equipment that represented a significant investment. During the cocktail hour, I nursed a single glass of wine and made polite conversation with relatives I hadn't seen in years. along with some of Derek's family friends who seemed pleasant enough, if somewhat distant. Everyone seemed appropriately impressed by the venue, the flowers, the obvious expense of every single detail. I found myself automatically calculating costs in my head, a habit from my property management business, and realized I was looking at what had to be a six-figure wedding. Beautiful ceremony, Uncle Robert said, appearing beside me as we watched Cassidy pose for photos with her bridesmaids near the garden fountain. Your sister certainly knows how to put on an event. Everything looks like it came straight out of a magazine. She does have great taste, I agreed, though I couldn't help wondering how they were actually paying for all this extravagance. Derek had a good job at his father's investment firm, and I knew Cassidy was making decent money at her marketing position. But even with family connections and possible parental contributions, this level of luxury seemed financially unsustainable for a couple just starting their married life. And how are your real estate investments doing? Uncle Robert asked, lowering his voice slightly. He was the only family member who'd ever taken my business seriously, probably because he'd made his own money in property development and understood the long-term value of real estate investments. Really well, actually. The lake house has been booked solid all season, and I'm looking at expanding into commercial properties next year. There's a small building downtown that would be perfect for my portfolio. Retail space on the ground floor and apartments above. Smart strategy. Building wealth slowly and steadily is the only way that really lasts in the long run. He glanced around the opulent ballroom, taking in the crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. Though I have to wonder what something like this costs. Must be quite an investment for a young couple. I'd been wondering exactly the same thing. The venue rental alone was probably $20,000, plus catering for 100 guests, the photographer and videographer team, the live music, the flowers, and all the other details that added up to what looked like a financial commitment that would take years to pay off properly. During dinner, I was seated at what was clearly the family overflow table. Distant cousins, family friends, and people who were important enough to invite but not quite important enough to sit near the head table where Derek's business associates and his parents' closest friends held court. It was fine by me. The conversation was more relaxed and genuine, and I didn't have to worry about impressing anyone or navigating the subtle social hierarchies that seemed to govern every interaction in Derek's family circle. But I could see Cassidy clearly from where I sat, radiant and animated as she held court at the head table, moving through the evening like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony. She'd planned every moment meticulously, making sure every detail was documented, every photo captured the right angle. Every guest felt appropriately awed by the spectacle she'd created for this one perfect day. The photographer had been systematically working through what was clearly a predetermined and carefully planned list, moving through the evening with professional efficiency that spoke to the premium rates Cassidy had mentioned. First came the bride with her carefully selected bridesmaids, all posed near the garden windows where the late afternoon light created the perfect romantic glow. Then the groom with his groomsmen, followed by the couple with Derek's parents and their closest family friends. Each grouping was meticulously arranged and shot from multiple angles, with the photographer's assistants adjusting lighting and positioning to ensure every image would be worthy of the society pages Cassidy hoped would feature her wedding. I watched from across the room as they captured Derek with his business associates, young men in expensive suits who all seemed to share the same confident bearing that came from knowing their futures were already secured through family connections. Next came Cassidy with her sorority sisters, then Derek with his fraternity brothers, followed by various combinations of the wedding party that would undoubtedly grace engagement announcements, anniversary celebrations, and social media profiles for years to come. Every shot was calculated to reinforce the narrative Cassidy had been building, that she belonged in this world of privilege and tradition, that her marriage to Derek was a natural fit rather than a carefully orchestrated social climb. I'd been watching from my assigned table, finishing my dessert, an elaborate creation that probably cost more per serving than I typically spent on entire meals, and assuming that the family photos would come toward the end of the formal session, once all the important portraits had been captured to Cassidy's satisfaction. Then Uncle Robert appeared beside my chair, champagne flute in hand and his usual cheerful, slightly flushed smile in place. He'd clearly been enjoying the open bar and the festive atmosphere, radiating the genuine warmth that had always made him my favorite relative on Dad's side of the family. "Come on, Nancy," he said, extending his arm toward me with the easy affection he'd shown both Cassidy and me since we were children. "Time for the family shots. Can't let them finish up without getting some pictures of the bride with her sister." I hesitated for a long moment. Remembering Cassidy's explicit and detailed instructions from our lunch 2 months earlier, about formal portraits being limited to essential family only, and my role being relegated to casual reception photos that wouldn't end up in any important displays. But this was Uncle Robert, who'd driven 6 hours from Pennsylvania to be here, who'd always treated both his nieces with exactly the same enthusiasm and pride, who probably had no idea about the careful social calculations that had gone into every aspect of this wedding. How could I explain to this kind, well-meaning man that I'd been specifically excluded from the important photos, that my presence would somehow diminish the perfect image Cassidy was trying to create? How could I tell him that his suggestion violated the unspoken rules that governed my place in this carefully choreographed event? "I think maybe they're still working on Derek's family portraits," I said weakly, hoping to avoid the confrontation I could sense coming. "Nonsense," Uncle Robert replied with a dismissive wave. "I just heard the photographer call for bride's family. That's us. Besides, these formal photos are exactly what your parents will want to frame and display. 20 years from now, this is what we'll all remember about today." So I followed him across the ballroom, smoothing down my carefully chosen dress and trying to project the kind of quiet confidence that would help me blend seamlessly into whatever composition the photographer had planned. My heart was already beating faster as we approached the portrait area, where the photographer was arranging people near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the golf course's pristine fairways. Mom and Dad were already in position, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of everything around them. They'd clearly made their own significant financial sacrifices to contribute to this wedding, probably dipping into retirement savings or taking on debt they couldn't easily afford. The photographer gestured for me to join the family grouping, and I stepped carefully into the frame, trying to position myself where I wouldn't block anyone or disrupt whatever carefully planned composition he was trying to achieve. That's when Cassidy's voice cut through the gentle murmur of pre-photo conversation like a knife blade through silk. "What are you doing?" The words were delivered with such sharp, cold precision that every conversation in the immediate area stopped instantly. Every head turned toward our family grouping, and I could feel the weight of dozens of curious stares as wedding guests tried to understand what had suddenly gone wrong with what should have been a joyful family moment. The photographer lowered his expensive camera immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension that had materialized in what had been a celebratory atmosphere. Derek's parents exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of the bride's family dynamics, while Mom and Dad stood frozen in their formal poses, neither stepping forward to defend their daughter nor supporting Cassidy's obvious displeasure with my presence in the photo. I sat in my car in the country club's parking lot for 20 minutes, hands shaking too badly to start the engine, 20 minutes of replaying that moment over and over until every detail was burned into my memory with painful clarity. The stunned faces of the wedding guests who'd witnessed my public humiliation. The way conversations had stopped mid-sentence when Cassidy's voice cut through the elegant atmosphere. The satisfied look on Derek's father's face as he'd signaled to security, as if having me removed validated his opinion about the kind of family his son was marrying into. But somewhere between the shame and the humiliation, something else began to build inside me. Something cold and sharp and calculating that started in my chest and spread outward until my hands stopped shaking, and my breathing steadied into something resembling normal rhythm. Fury. Not the hot, impulsive kind that makes you say things you regret later, but the calculated anger of someone who'd been pushed too far, who'd sacrificed too much for people who viewed kindness as weakness and generosity as something they were entitled to receive without gratitude or reciprocation. I thought about the phone calls I'd made 3 weeks ago, 7 conversations that had torn apart other people's carefully laid plans. 7 families whose vacation plans I'd disrupted so Cassidy could have her perfect honeymoon at my expense. The Patels whose multi-generational reunion I'd canceled, probably disappointing elderly grandparents who'd been looking forward to this trip for months. The Hendersons, who'd trusted me with their anniversary tradition, and would now have to scramble to find alternative accommodations during peak season. The Johnson family, whose reunion had been planned for 8 months, with relatives coordinating schedules and booking flights from 3 different states. The Chicago couple celebrating a 30-year career milestone. The young family with 2 small children who'd saved up all year for their first real vacation together, choosing my house specifically because it looked perfect for families in the photos. All of them disappointed, inconvenienced, and forced to alter their plans so my sister could maintain her facade of wealth and success. All of them treated as expendable so she could impress her new in-laws with a luxury honeymoon she couldn't afford and didn't deserve. I pulled out my phone and opened the property management app that controlled the smart locks, security system, and all the electronic access features for my rental properties. The lake house was sitting empty this week, waiting like a perfectly appointed stage set for Cassidy and Derek to arrive on Sunday morning for their complimentary week-long honeymoon. The house I'd invested 4 years of careful saving to purchase, working overtime and weekend projects to scrape together the down payment. The house that generated the steady income I used to build my real estate portfolio and secure my financial future. The house my sister thought she was entitled to use for free because we happened to share DNA and childhood memories. My finger hovered over the booking calendar, and I realized how easy it would be to simply unblock those dates and list the house as available again. I had inquiries every single day from potential guests who'd love a last-minute reservation at my most popular property, especially during the prime spring season when the lake was beautiful and the weather was perfect for outdoor activities. But that approach felt too simple, too clean and straightforward. Cassidy needed to understand that actions had consequences, that treating family like unpaid servants who existed to subsidize her lifestyle choices was not without cost. She needed to learn that humiliating people who'd gone out of their way to help you was a mistake that came with real, tangible repercussions. I called Patricia, my property management assistant who helped with bookings, maintenance coordination, and guest communications when I couldn't handle them myself. Nancy, everything okay? It's pretty late for a business call, and I thought you were at your sister's wedding tonight. Patricia, I need you to list the lake house as available starting this Sunday, the full week that I had blocked off. There was a pause, and I could hear her pulling up the booking calendar on her computer. But didn't you have that week reserved for your sister's honeymoon? I thought you were giving her the family rate as a wedding gift. Change of plans, I said, my voice steadier and more determined than I'd expected. Listed at premium rates, $500 a night minimum, with a 3-night minimum stay requirement, and I need you to change all the access codes tonight so the old ones won't work anymore. Are you sure about this? That's going to be a lot of scrambling to find guests for such short notice, even at premium rates. And won't your sister be upset if she finds out the house isn't available? I'm absolutely sure. In fact, let me handle the booking personally when inquiries come in. I want to personally approve whoever stays there and make sure they'll truly appreciate the property. After I hung up, I sat in the parking lot and methodically updated every access code for the house using my phone. The smart lock system, the security alarm, the Wi-Fi password, even the lockbox where I kept spare keys for maintenance crews and emergency situations. By the time I was finished, the house was completely secured against anyone who might have the old access codes or think they had permission to use the property. Then I opened my email and started crafting a very specific listing description for the lake house. The call came at exactly 2:15 on Sunday afternoon, just as I was finishing a leisurely lunch on my apartment balcony and reviewing the enthusiastic responses I'd received to my premium lake house listing. Cassidy's number flashed on my phone screen, and I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring every moment of anticipation before the conversation that would change everything between us. Nancy! Her voice was shrill with panic and barely controlled hysteria, so different from the confident, superior tone she'd used throughout the wedding planning process. Something's wrong with your house. The access code isn't working, and there are people here who claim they have a legitimate reservation for this week. I could hear Derek in the background, his voice tight with frustration as he argued with someone, probably trying to maintain his dignity while his perfect honeymoon plans crumbled around him. I could also hear other voices, what sounded like a family with children asking excited questions about when they could go swimming and whether the kayaks were included in their rental. Oh, I said with deliberate calm, taking a sip of my iced tea and watching a hawk circle over the parking lot below my balcony. You must mean the Anderson family. They booked the house for the entire week at premium rates. Lovely people from Minneapolis who've been planning this vacation for months. They specifically mentioned how much they were looking forward to their first lake house experience. The silence on the other end was so complete, I could hear Derek's Mercedes idling in the background and what sounded like children's laughter from the Anderson family as they explored the property that was rightfully theirs for the week. Then, what are you talking about? This is our honeymoon week. You specifically told me we could use the house. We drove 3 hours to get here, and Derek took the entire week off work. His parents are expecting photos of us enjoying the lake house. That arrangement was made before you decided to have me thrown out of your wedding by security guards, I replied, my voice remaining perfectly level and businesslike, as if I were discussing a routine property management issue rather than destroying my sister's honeymoon plans. After that experience, I decided I needed to reconsider our family arrangement and return to treating this as the business property it actually is. Nancy, you cannot be serious right now. We drove 3 hours to get here. Our luggage is packed in the car. We stopped and bought groceries for the week. Derek's parents are expecting a full report about the house. And we don't have anywhere else to go. Everything decent within 50 miles of here is completely booked for the weekend. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I said, examining my manicured nails with satisfaction. You're very resourceful when it comes to spending money you don't have and manipulating situations to your advantage. I have complete confidence in your ability to solve this problem. Through the phone, I could hear the Anderson children getting more excited about exploring the lake house, their voices carrying the pure joy that came from a family finally reaching their long-anticipated vacation destination. I could also hear Derek's voice getting more strained as he realized they weren't going to be able to simply wait out this awkward situation and claim the house through sheer persistence. Nancy, please listen to me. I know you're upset about the photo situation at the wedding, but that wasn't personal. Derek's family just has very specific expectations about their public image, and those photos were going to be displayed at important social events. You have to understand the position I was in. I understand completely, I interrupted, my voice taking on the patient tone I used with difficult tenants who tried to negotiate their way out of lease violations. And my position is that people who want to use my property need to treat me with basic respect and common courtesy. Since that seems to be beyond your capabilities, I've made alternative arrangements that work better for my business. But we're family. You can't treat family like this over one misunderstanding. The same way you treated family when you had your own sister escorted out of your wedding like some kind of security threat? I asked. The same way you demanded thousands of dollars worth of free accommodations while making it clear that I was an embarrassment to your perfect image. That kind of family treatment? I could hear her breathing heavily, probably trying to process the reality that her actions had actual consequences, that treating people badly eventually came back to affect her own plans and comfort. Nancy, we can work this out. We can sit down and talk about what happened, maybe find some kind of compromise. Derek's parents are going to ask detailed questions about why our honeymoon plans changed, and I need to have answers that don't make our family look dysfunctional. We could have worked something out before you decided I wasn't worthy of being included in your family photos, I said, standing up and walking to my balcony railing to watch the Anderson family unloading their vacation supplies with obvious excitement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare welcome materials for my next guests who are arriving this evening. They're paying full premium rates, they made their reservation through proper channels, and they actually said thank you when they confirmed their booking. I hung up and immediately blocked both her number and Derek's, then poured myself another glass of iced tea and opened my laptop to check my property management dashboard. The Anderson family had already left a 5-star review commenting on how clean and beautifully appointed the house was, and I had 3 new inquiries for future bookings at premium rates. The calls from my parents started exactly 47 minutes after I hung up on Cassidy, which told me she'd wasted no time in spinning her version of events to make herself the victim of my unreasonable behavior. Mom called first, her voice tight with disappointment and confusion. Nancy, what on earth is going on? Cassidy just called us crying, saying you've ruined her honeymoon and embarrassed Derek in front of paying strangers. She says you changed the locks on your house and are refusing to honor your agreement to let them stay there. That's an interesting interpretation, I said calmly. Did she mention why I might have changed my mind about providing free accommodations? She said there was some misunderstanding at the wedding about family photos. But Nancy, that's no reason to destroy your sister's honeymoon. Derek's family is going to think we're completely dysfunctional. I almost laughed at the irony. Derek's family already thinks that. Mom, that's why they had security escort me out of the reception for trying to be in a family photo. Dad called 20 minutes later, his approach more direct and demanding. Nancy, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to fix this situation immediately. Your sister is married into an important family now, and this kind of petty behavior reflects on all of us. Petty behavior like providing thousands of dollars worth of free accommodations after being publicly humiliated? I asked. Or petty behavior like having your own sister removed from your wedding by security guards? That's between you and Cassidy, but right now she needs family support and you're being selfish and vindictive. I ended both calls feeling surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in years, I'd set a clear boundary and stuck to it, despite the family pressure that had always worked to manipulate me into sacrificing my own interests for Cassidy's convenience. 3 months later, I ran into Uncle Robert at a coffee shop downtown. He looked genuinely happy to see me, which was more than I could say for my immediate family members who'd been giving me the cold shoulder since the honeymoon incident. Nancy, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you since the wedding. His expression grew more serious. I wanted to apologize for my part in what happened with those photos. I had no idea about the arrangements Cassidy had made. It wasn't your fault. Uncle Robert, you were just trying to include family in a family photo. That should have been normal. Well, I think what happened to you was completely inappropriate, and I told your parents so. Family should support family, not throw them under the bus for social climbing purposes. He updated me on what had happened after their disastrous honeymoon weekend. Cassidy and Derek had ended up staying at a budget motel 40 minutes from the lake, the kind of place with stained carpets and questionable cleanliness that was the antithesis of the luxury image they'd wanted to project. Derek's parents had indeed asked detailed questions about the change in plans, and apparently Derek had been forced to admit that his new wife's family wasn't as well connected or reliable as he'd led them to believe. Last I heard, Derek's father is having second thoughts about bringing him into the family business so quickly, Uncle Robert said quietly. Apparently there are questions about Derek's judgment in choosing a wife who can't maintain family relationships or deliver on promises. As for my parents, they'd eventually stopped calling to lecture me about family loyalty, probably realizing that their favorite daughter's marriage wasn't turning out to be the social and financial success story they'd hoped to brag about to their friends. My real estate business, meanwhile, had never been better. The Anderson family had become repeat customers, booking my lake house for the same week every year, and referring friends who appreciated quality properties managed by reliable hosts. The premium rates I'd charged that week had helped me secure the commercial building I'd been eyeing, and my portfolio now included 6 properties generating steady passive income. I'd also started screening potential family requests more carefully. When my cousin asked to borrow one of my apartments for a visiting relative, I quoted her the standard rental rate and required a security deposit, just like any other tenant. When she complained that families should get special treatment, I reminded her that respect and appreciation should go both ways. Cassidy and I haven't spoken since that Sunday afternoon phone call. I hear updates occasionally through extended family. Apparently, she and Derek are struggling with the debt from their wedding and are living in a smaller apartment than they'd originally planned. Derek's career advancement has stalled, and Cassidy's changed jobs twice in the past year, each time taking a step backward in salary and responsibility. I don't take pleasure in their difficulties, but I don't feel guilty about them either. I'd learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for maintaining your self-respect and protecting the things you've worked hard to build. Some people will only value what you provide when they have to pay for it and can't take it for granted. Every month when I review my rental income and investment portfolio, I remember that afternoon in the country club parking lot when I decided to stop being the family doormat. That decision to prioritize my own financial security over Cassidy's social climbing turned out to be one of the best business decisions I've ever made. The lake house continues to be my most profitable property, booked year-round by guests who appreciate luxury accommodations and treat my property with respect. And I've never had to have anyone escorted out by security for wanting to be included in a family